That might be a way that the art market works, more to the tastes of an emerging generation.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, she talks about it being a sort of reverse trajectory to artists like Takashi Murakami, who gained the kind of institutional acclaim first.
I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. We are back with our monthly roundup where we parse and analyze some of the biggest headlines turning heads in the art world and art industry. It is the dog days of summer, but the art industry doesn't really take a break. There's been lots going on, and we are going to crack into some of it today. So, as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Ben Davis, dialing in from New York. Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm great. Nice to talk to you.
And we also have with us today our editor-in-chief, Naomi Rea, dialing in from London. It's exciting to have you back on, Naomi.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I love the Chatcast, so very happy to get invited.
We've got some good topics today. Today we're going to talk about Johnny Depp's new directorial endeavor, Modi, 3 Days on the Wings of Madness, his second attempt at directing in 30 years. The film is a biographical drama based on the life of the artist Modigliani. Then we will discuss some rumblings around the U.S. Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which is set to take place next year. And I'm sorry in advance, we are going to talk about the Labubus, but we promise it's going to be interesting and full of new information. But first, as we're spread between three countries, I'd love to know what's been up in your respective places these days. What's been going on in London, Naomi?
Well, I was very excited earlier this summer to bump into Arthur Jafa, who is, a brilliant artist and responsible for kind of one of what many people see as one of the most important works of this century. Love is the message is death.
Sure.
And he brought that to London earlier this month to a small project space in Croydon. And I was very interested to watch the film, about a decade after it was originally released, and to sort of kind of see how it lands in a new kind of political climate. Obviously, it was produced in 2016, kind of the tail end of the Obama years, right as kind of Trump's first presidency was coming into view. For readers or listeners who haven't seen the film, it's a kind of 7-minute or 7.5-minute film. It's a kind of rapid-fire montage of found footage from the internet depicting these kind of uplifting moments of Black joy, but being kind of interspersed and knitted together with these kind of devastating images of Black death that was inundating our social media feeds at that time. And it felt very urgent and unflinching then. And I was really curious to watch it again in this kind of sort of post-George Floyd, post-Black Lives Matter, and as we're in a kind of even more alarming political moment, to sort of see how the work would land a second time.
Sure. A work that was at the top of a lot of people's lists, like you said, of best works of the 2010s, and really captured a moment. I do wonder, has it changed meaning over time? I think it's very famously set to a song by Kanye West, Ultra Light Beam, which is just to say, Kanye West's meaning has changed a lot in that intervening time, and I'm sure the film itself might have changed resonance. Did it hit different?
It hit different. It definitely did. One of the things about the work is that it is very, very formally powerful. The very first time I saw it, I was in tears. I wasn't really expecting to be so emotionally kind of hit by it. And I was curious, whether that would happen again. And Jafa's spoken a lot about the reaction to the work. It was very critically acclaimed. A lot of people, really emphasized how emotionally devastating it was and how it had made them cry. And he'd sort of been very critical of that. He's spoken about it in a lot of interviews, and he calls it a microwave epiphany, that the implication is that it wasn't really a sufficient reaction, that people telling him that they cried at the work was not a measure of kind of productive or critical engagement with it.
Yeah, I
Mm.
saw that work in 2018 at the Julia Stoshek collection. And Ben, we talked about on the episode about Aesthetic Chill's Apex, another work by
Right.
Arthur Jafa.
Yeah.
And I think Love is the Message is Death has the same effect, like the power of juxtapositioning and what it does to you on like a physical level is really intense. And we should also mention, the element of dance that is played in that and sort of rhythm, because I believe the work is on view alongside a famous work by Mark Leckey, right, Naomi?
Yes, yes, Fiorucci made me hardcore. And absolutely, I think that microwave epiphany, that's the term that Jafa gave to the formal kind of qualities of the work or whatever. I think that aesthetic chills and what Ben has written about aesthetic chills, it's describing kind of something very similar, like the formal qualities of how a work can kind of cause, or can stir up an emotional reaction in people.
I know what he means by a microwave epiphany in the sense, like a fast, you're having a very profound experience in a very accelerated way, and there may be something inauthentic about it. But part of me thinks, isn't that what art does? It concentrates emotional energy into one space so you can experience emotions more intensely in a more concentrated, faster way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I've been thinking about, essentially, about kind of that reaction that I had initially, and then what Jafa said about how our tier is a productive, measure of engagement with the work. And I think, well, when people say that it brought them to tears, that's a comment on the formal composition of the work. That's maybe the most emotionally resonance or a kind of surface level reading, but doesn't mean it's the only kind of reaction that people had. Doesn't mean that ability for the work to kind of speed up that emotional reaction didn't start, a process of kind of critical self-reflection or spur people to action. And I think, that context of the work, being made in 2016 before the momentum that happened around Black Lives Matter in 2020, I guess you could say it's more accessible, or it was able to communicate a very complicated message and an urgent political reality quite efficiently and quickly. And I think that's actually, a great power of the work rather than, necessarily a shortcoming.
Indeed, it's a powerful work. I mean, we could spend a whole episode talking
Yeah.
about these films. They're so deeply impactful. Ben, what about you? You were in New York right now, but you were just at Site Santa Fe, I believe, right?
Yeah, well, I've been on vacation and just got back last night, but I went out to the Southwest for Site Santa Fe. I was moderating a panel with some curators who've curated that biennial over the years. It's 30 years old. It's the first international art biennial in the United States. Cecilia Alemany is a very famous curator, did the Venice Biennale, has done this 30th anniversary edition of Site Santa Fe. It's called Once Within a Time, and a very interesting show. I think people should check it out if they're out in Santa Fe. I guess in terms of things that came out of it, things that I think are interesting, the show is named Once Within a Time, which is the name of a film by the filmmaker Godfrey Reggio, who lives in Santa Fe. And if you know him, if people know him, it might be from his film Koyaanisqatsi from the 80s, which is a legendary abstract film about industrial society out of control. This is all just to say, my most interesting artistic moment of the last couple weeks is that I got to meet him when I was in Santa Fe. I got to go to his studio, and he is 85, I believe, and just, it's like meeting a wizard. He is amazing. His studio is full. The walls are covered with cutouts and notes from the research he's doing for his films. And I got to talk to him, and he told me all about meeting Guy Debord in the past. And we talked about ideas and his art and what he's working on next. And I was enchanted by the experience.
That's so cool. Cecilia Alemany, as you mentioned, curated the Venice Biennale a few years ago, which was widely acclaimed and most people loved it. Were there any continuities there? Because I know the Site Santa Fe Biennial is quite locally specific.
Well, it's gone through a whole process. We talked about this in the panel I did, that there is a whole evolution of biennials from being focused on cosmopolitanism and internationalism when it started back in the 90s. That was the theme of everything. And actually, one of the things I take away from the discussion I had on stage there's an interesting conversation in biennials that parallels the larger breakdown of ideas of cosmopolitanism in the political sphere, where everybody's thinking more nationally and regionally. And it has been the case, that has been the case in biennials everywhere, and including in Cecilia's, where one of the innovations of this show is that there's art in it, and then there are stories, like local stories, where she focuses on people like the author Cormac McCarthy and just references like poetry he wrote, or let's see, what's my favorite one? Oh, the author Willa Cather, and that you can see some of her drawings, and there are other more local characters whose names I can't even remember, who are Santa Fe-based characters who are just their stories are studded throughout the show alongside art, which makes for an interesting experience that I'm still trying to think through whether that works for me.
Do you think that's because the art has become less legible or less, I don't know, just thinking about what we were just talking about and kind of how a lot of political art almost feels like it has gotten further removed from being sort of legible and being aesthetic, and maybe that somehow like that having a kind of formal or aesthetic quality somehow diminishes its moral value?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with different things, but one of them is sort of opening people up, particularly contemporary art. It's sometimes there are these mysterious ways that artists make. They're making things in odd ways that aren't necessarily visual. So having those stories there of like local characters that people connect with, I think sort of signposts to a larger audience that keep your eyes open. This is about connecting with ways of living, which I think is a smart decision. How the best way to present it is, I don't know. Again, we should do a whole episode on this. But we have so much to talk about. Kate, I want to know what you've seen in Berlin before we really get into it.
Yeah, quickly, I guess to mention the Berlin Biennial, another big biennial that's on right now until September 14th.
Oh, speaking of biennials, yeah.
The summer of biennials. It's called Passing the Fugitive On. Very unclear term. I don't know what it means after having seen the show, to be honest. But another story, conceived by curator Sasha Kola, who is Turin-based, but she is from Mumbai and she works with a lot of artists from Myanmar. So the show had a real political focus. It also talked a lot about different states' oppressions. And I think that's kind of where the trouble began for this Berlin Biennial, because given the recent cultural sector protests in Germany and, controversies around censorship in Germany, and also the activities of this group called Strike Germany, which is basically suggesting that artists should not work in Germany while Germany is supporting Israel. The show didn't really meet the moment. That was what several critics said in some other publications. We have not published a review of the show yet, but that was kind of the general takeaway, that they didn't really address this issue, which is going on in Germany right now. That said, I thought that the show had some really nice high points. There was a lot of discoveries, but I did feel like in general it was a little bit vague and it came across like a bit of a whisper. There was this whole element of humor that was supposed to play out, which I was quite excited about, but I didn't really quite feel it as much as I wish I had. It comes at a very vexed time in the German cultural sphere. And so I think it let a lot of people down on multiple fronts.
Wow, talk about stuff that we could have a whole episode about.
Certainly, yeah. But we should get into arguably something quite a lot lighter, which is we had some homework to watch the new Johnny Depp film, Modi. Naomi, do you want to run us through the idea behind this film and maybe the plot before we get into our views on it?
Sure. So we're going to talk about Johnny Depp's, the second film he's directed in 20 years or something like that, which just released this month. And it's a biopic of Amedeo Modigliani, although not very informative as far as biopics go. There's a lot of rich kind of detail in Modigliani's life that could have been drawn on and that has made, many films. But rather than kind of looking at some of those biographic details, I mean, he died at 35 of tuberculosis, and his lover subsequently killed herself while she was 8 months pregnant with his second child. There's a ton, that it could have gone into, but it doesn't go there at all. It looks at kind of 72 hours in the life of this artist, and it's kind of a romantic, I might say shallow portrait of a kind of bohemian artist in 20th century Paris. It's kind of depicts Modigliani as a kind of impulsive, maybe self-destructive man. He dabbles in drugs and sex and turns down an offer of lots of money from an important collector out of kind of romantic principle, burns down his studio. And it's a real kind of caricature of that like passionate, uncontrollable, starving artist. Ultimately, maybe a little self-indulgent. I gave you that homework, and it's a 2-hour film.
Sure, yeah. Kate, what did you think about it?
I'd received some prior warning from Naomi, but also our colleague Min wrote a review of it on ArtNet, which I would recommend everyone reads. So I wasn't like going in with the highest expectations. I did learn some things, this ragtag gang of outsiders hanging around Montparnasse. I didn't really know the full story of Modigliani and Haim Soutine, who is an artist who I'm a big fan of, that was, active around Paris at that time.
Kind of hard done by, though, Soutine, provides a little bit of like comic relief in the film.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
I was going to say,
Soutine is so badly treated.
I can't with actors putting on Eastern European accents poorly. They really made a caricature out of him, which is really too bad because he's a fantastic artist and he felt just kind of like the clown of the movie, no?
Totally.
For people who have not seen this movie or will not see it, there is a scene where Soutine literally has a dead fly living on his face or embedded in his face. It is so gross. And it's like living with a cockroach. I don't know. It's very unpleasant in a way.
As Naomi said, there's so much that this film could have done. It was based on a play as well, but it just felt like a sort of a pastiche of a bunch of separate scenes. There was no overarching vision of what this film was trying to say about this artist, what his real drive was to make his art, or what even Haim Soutine's was. So it sort of just felt like a pieced together group of episodes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Even formally, I think Min wrote this in her review about the tone, which is kind of all over the place. It's a bit clumsy. There's sort of this kind of slapstick moments and this comic relief, and then a sort of random silent film interlude and these meandering kind of flashbacks to his childhood.
And then like a Tom Waits song comes in.
Yeah, the music.
It smacks of a director who is excited to make a film and wants to try out all these things that he's clearly been thinking about over the span of his acting career. As you said, like black and white interludes and all these great songs that I have on vinyl probably, it just felt like everything was rammed in there and you kind of have to pick a tone. That's why it felt like episodes almost.
And although the movie is about Modigliani, it is dedicated to Jeff Beck, the guitarist, who Johnny Depp is friends with, they've gone on tour with. So the film is really sort of a tribute to the creative spirit or Johnny Depp's perception of what the creative spirit should be. And my reaction to the film is that it is not really a film meant to be watched by the general public. It's more of a coded text to Johnny Depp fans, is how I read it. It's put out by his production company. It comes out of the whole story where Al Pacino wanted to make a film out of this. There's actually another Modigliani film that spun off from the same play. There's a very specific vision that's been in the works for a long time that Depp finally, post-controversy, post a decade of controversy, which includes the infamous Depp Heard spousal abuse libel case, and also his own overspending. Like I went back and read the 2019 Rolling Stone review of him that is infamous in terms of it just depicts him living this extravagant lifestyle, really talks about his belief in himself as a creative genius who is living this passionate life and will not compromise with anything and constantly doing drugs and drinking. He brags about spending more than $30,000 a month on wine in that profile, which is very dark considering all the accusations of abuse that happened during the Depp Heard trial. So I really just view this film in so many ways as basically a coded text to his fans saying, like, this is how I think about creativity. It's this free-spirited thing where you love and enjoy without constraints. And if you break through a stained glass window and offend people and act bad, that's all just what it's about, being an artist, right?
I think you're spot on, Ben, with that reading of the film. I also think rather than it being a portrait of Modigliani, it's a portrait of Johnny Depp himself. And I attended a screening of this film in London at Tate Modern.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, Johnny Depp was on a panel discussion afterwards, and he gave some further insight into this film. The panel was titled The Universal Plight of the Artist.
Oh, boy.
Okay, there you go.
That sums it up.
Indeed. So, I mean, it was overall very smug and kind of self-congratulatory. It was moderated by the Sunday Times art critic, Waldemar Jankusic, who's a kind of greasy character himself. And Depp is, in the beginning, he quoted Dr. Johnson via Hunter S. Thompson. It's the first line of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is, "He who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man." After which he did feel the need to specify to the audience that this is about humanity and it's not just about men, which I think,
Well, yes, he's become sort of the Pied Piper or an icon of the post-Me Too moment, right? So I suppose that's very important note on his part.
We're slamming this thing pretty hard. I do want to say that the acting was, in some moments, really great. Bruno Gori, who played Maurice Utrillo, who was a painter in Paris at that time, who's also in White Lotus and Emily in Paris, I thought was really good. I thought Stephen Graham, who was in Snatch, who plays the art dealer, Leopold Zaborski, was good. But again, I just feel like they weren't given the right lines to really bring some of this story to life. So,
I mean, Al Pacino was also very good. I think he brought a real presence to Maurice
Hard disagree.
Gagnon. Oh, well, I thought that was the best scene in the film. Him and Beatrice Hastings. I would disagree about Utrillo, but that's because I just really couldn't see around the Emily in Paris thing. And it made me think that this whole film was like an episode of Emily in Paris.
Oh, yeah, exactly. They're like caricatures of free-spirited artists where they're like sprawled out on the street and peeing in the corner. There's a long scene where they argue over whether to release a cockroach. And he's like, "The cockroach, it is you. It is you. That's the bug free." And it's so... I mean, I think the whole thing's cringe. This was originally an Al Pacino project. He handed it off. They talked about this when they were filming Donnie Brasco. And he handed it off to Depp. Apparently is still a supporter and has been a subject, I believe, of Depp's own art, which we can talk about in a moment. Yeah, I just thought the scene itself is the best scene in the movie and gives you one of the few real feeling things about it, which is that Modigliani did consider himself a sculptor and only a painter by default. And that's sort of the substance of that scene where he's trying to sell his paintings. The collector's like, "These are no good, but I will give you all this money for this sculpture." And that's too precious to me. I refuse it. But I just thought Al Pacino's accent was not good. Very late stage Al Pacino kind of performance for me.
Ben, you mentioned Johnny Depp's art as part of, maybe part of a wider Johnny Depp rebrand that we're all witnessing. Naomi, do you want to quickly run us through what was going on with this drop?
Well, with the drop, I mean, it's, again, I think that Johnny Depp is doing reputation management of some sort. He's rebranding himself as this visionary artist. And I guess, all of that, his past becomes part of that image, right? I mean, the recent drop was actually a drop of prints, I think, of artwork that he made, in, I guess, a quieter time of his life when he was with his family and his daughter. Some of his comments about the work were a little strange. He kind of talks about this kind of idyllic time in his life and how great it was to be a dad, as if he is no longer a dad.
But before that, right on the heels of the Depp Heard trial, like literally the month afterwards, he sold $3 million. I don't remember, it was $3 million or £3 million of art prints from his Heroes series, which is like images of people he considers creative inspirations like Hunter S. Thompson and Bob Marley. And these are truly bad. There was such a Depp fandom. I went back and watched the Depp v. Heard documentary last night in preparation for this, doing my homework. And, I forgot just how maniacal the fandom about him, of people who are, Johnny's been wronged and I am going to support him. And he immediately was able to turn that into money with this series of what you have to say are very bad paintings. He's a collector of both Warhol and Basquiat, and these, they look like the bad late period Warhol celebrity portraits where there's a silk-screened image of a celebrity and then some light detailing texturing on it. I mean, that's what it is. And I just say all that because I think it reflects back into the movie that, like, the idea of art, you can see these videos he does about these art prints where he's like, I'm so passionate about this amazing art. I'm doing all this stuff. And you look at me like, that's the art you're so passionate about? Like, what is the passion here? And then the film, too, has this idea of the artist, and it all just feels so stock and cliche and empty and frayed around the edges.
He really wants to be taken seriously, though, as an artist. I feel like when he's speaking and he's trying here, you can tell that he's got this desperation to get this, like, approval of the art world and kind of critical attention of all of these people he sees himself in a lineage of.
As does Adrian Brody, but
very similar.
Maybe they're friends. But we should move on from, one blockbuster arguably to another. The State Department's deadline for submissions has passed. If you are an artist who wanted to make art for the Venice Biennial U.S. Pavilion next year, you can no longer submit. However, we do have some stories around this. Ben, do you want to walk us through what's been going on with the U.S. Pavilion?
Well, the long and the short answer of it is that no one knows what's going on. The Venice Biennale, who people have heard us blab about the Venice Biennale a lot. It's the Olympics of the art world. It's the biggest art show in the world. It happens once every 2 years. It's very important which artist goes for which country. And because of the entire nature of the Trump 2 administration's relationship to culture, what's going to happen has been a little bit up in the air. Partly because it's not clear who wants to represent the U.S. at this particular moment when, Trump is pulling out of UNESCO and so on, and banning DEI programs. They've released new guidelines, actually, for the Venice Biennale, saying that the most important thing is that the pavilion not promote DEI in any way. There's also a new mandate that anybody who does the pavilion for the U.S. in Venice will be monitored constantly by the State Department to make sure that they can live up to the challenge. Even though they released the guidelines late, there's been reporting about how it's not even clear logistically how possible it is to get everything together, all the funding and the art and the logistics together between September 1st when they'll announce it and April of next year when the show happens. And then the interesting thing is that because of the chaos, a certain degree of provocative space has opened up for artists to propose provocations, like what they might do if they got the space. So most recently, Andre Serrano, who is most famous for doing Piss Christ in the 1980s, a photo of a crucifix submerged in urine. That touched off a huge controversy in the first Culture Wars era, was partly blamed for the National Endowment for the Arts eliminating its individual artist grants. He has said he'd like to do the pavilion and said that he has this installation called The Game All Things Trump, which is a installation of eBay memorabilia relating to Donald Trump that he purchased for hundreds of thousands of dollars, that he has shown his installation, often is shown as a portrait of America. It's toured Europe. There was a pop-up here in New York during the first Trump administration, and he very publicly has said, I'd love to do this. If they'll let me, I'll do it. It would be all things Donald Trump. What could be more appropriate for the moment? A bit of a provocation. I think it has a snowball's chance in hell of getting selected, but has been the chatter. What do you think of this whole state of things?
I think it's an interesting proposal. I think Serrano's position seems like it is difficult to read for people. I mean, what people can't seem to decide whether this is pro-Trump or anti-Trump art, as if it's somehow kind of really non-partisan. I think it's very clear, but this is kind of like, I think the point is that it's almost like the whole thing, like Trump himself and the portrait of Trump or portrait of America, that all this collection of objects delivers is actually just a bit of a cipher for, the reader, or to project their own values onto.
I agree. It's an interesting project in the sense that it does play both sides. And even in the coverage around it, I mean, at ArtNet News, we referred to it as a shrine, but some other publications called it a mausoleum, which has slightly more negative connotations. So in a way, it does have this open-endedness to it. You don't think there's any chance that this would be selected? I mean, Trump loves images of himself.
Well, I don't know what they're going to select. It genuinely will be interesting. Watch this space for when it's announced. I've talked to and heard from museum people who are just very confused about how to apply, whether to apply. I have talked to artists who are planning various kinds of guerrilla pop-ups, possibly in opposition. Kate, maybe it's because you're in Germany. The name Andres Serrano is essentially universally associated with Piss Christ. Like, the most enraging artwork literally gets attacked wherever it goes. So I don't see the Trump administration, which is very cynical in many ways, looking at this and being like, yeah, this is the one we want to do. And I think they know that it's kind of making fun of him.
Perhaps. I will say, Serrano and the Pope did make up. Remember? He was invited into the Vatican, so Christians are not as mad as they used to be, perhaps. But I'm curious, Trump has been president before, and in the last administration, there was actually 2 Venice Biennials that took place.
That's right.
How did those work out? Because it seems like the tone is very different this time around.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about it, and I went back and I saw that in 2018, the first year of the first Trump administration, also the Venice Biennale proposals were out of whack. Like, they got their act together very late. It was just not the priority, just as it does not seem to have been the priority in this administration. And there were artists like proposing joke proposals then too. So it's like, okay, so we're kind of stuck in a loop. What ended up happening under Trump 1 is 2 very critically acclaimed pavilions, Mark Bradford and then Martin Puryear, both Black American artists with very different practices, but both scholarly, interesting, well-supported shows. And that could have happened under Biden, could have happened under Obama. Really unremarkable in terms of what they were. However, things are different this time. There just seems to be much more focus. We did a whole podcast about this on controlling culture, and particularly this new language, attacking DEI. They specifically removed the language about promoting diversity and inclusion and added language saying that they want it to promote American values on the world stage.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think Serrano's proposal is interesting in and of itself. He seems to be proposing not even necessarily that he would be the artist for the US pavilion, but that Trump would be the artist who is representing the US, which I think it's a comment on that. Works of art that reflect and promote American values. This is what America is valuing right now. And I think it's very interesting as a concept, and I think would be something that critics could really engage with.
Ben, we'd be remiss if we don't mention Curtis Yarvin really quickly, because he also had a little proposal.
Sure. I mean, like I said, this has become an imaginary space that people can just use for publicity. It's very Trumpian in a way, that everybody is trying to profit off of the confusion and chaos and ego around this guy. All of American culture orbits Trump right now in one way or another. I guess so the Serrano is one way. The other way is this philosopher, I guess if you want to call him that, Curtis Yarvin. He's been profiled now in the New Yorker and the New York Times, and people love to give this guy space. His theory is neo-monarchism and is very big on the idea that culture is captured by the liberals and that we need to ditch democracy and take back culture. In any case, he has also gotten a bunch of press for saying that He wants to do the Venice Biennale Pavilion with a, sexual assault themed show around the rape of Europa. So loosely around images of immigration and sexual assault. And he promoted it with an AI generated clip that features angry feminists protesting him and him becoming a demon god who hypnotizes the art masses into becoming pro-Trump monarchists, I guess. It is embarrassing, kind of cringe, and I don't think a serious proposal. Frankly, it's a little unclear to me how serious the Serrano proposal is. Again, I think it is an attempt to troll people, use the space to get people talking. It's sort of interesting that that's the media environment we're talking within now, but that's exactly as far as the interest goes for me.
Yeah, for better or for worse, there's always an interesting satellite discourse around these pavilions. But yeah,
that's true.
Curtis Yarvin, who was, I believe in your piece you mentioned he was at Basel pitching this around, which brings us to Labubu, which was also at Basel, the newest collectible craze. It's a frenzy, to say it bluntly, which doesn't really show any signs of slowing down from my vantage point. How to describe a Labubu? I guess it's a batteryless.
Yes, I think you need to describe what a Labubu is for some of our audience.
Let's see if I can do this. A batteryless Furby in the costume of a Teletubby with the 90s craze energy of a Beanie Baby with the TikTok trendiness of a cause companion.
Okay,
does that
nice.
work?
Okay, I like it.
They're little devilish, elfish dolls that actually have a longer history than I had initially realized. They were created by the artist Ka Sing Lung back in 2015. But when they really entered the scene was when this Chinese toy company Pop Mart started to do drops with them, limited edition series. And that's when they started to get this uptake and different celebrities started, showing them on their Instagram feeds and this kind of thing. So I should say these often dangle on your bag. In June, Art Basel did a drop of about 100 of these little art handler Labubus, these little blue ones that have levels in their paws. They were $250 a pop. They all sold out.
Like they're art handler Labubus is what they are.
They were, yeah. Yeah, they were holding little levels. They were ready to hang your painting.
It's an ode to the blue-collar wing of the art world, the art installers who do the physical labor of installing art, which I think is very funny.
Exactly. Ready to hang your painting that's dropped 70% in value in the past year.
Well, yeah, the Labubu might be worth more than the painting.
Exactly. And there were 2 drops of 50 Labubus each day. And as Kenny Schachter, our columnist, said, they were, quote, the only objects that were flying out the door at Basel, arguably. So yeah, I'm curious, what do you guys make of the Labubu craze as it's crashed into the art world?
I mean, I think it's interesting from a market perspective. I mean, the characters were around for a long time, but actually what made them so successful with this viral moment is because Pop Mart sells them in blind boxes. So they're collectible items, but they're using this element of surprise. So you don't know which character you're getting. And some of them are more rare than others. So people are buying up these very accessibly priced boxes because they're something like $30 a pop. And they're unboxing them and getting really excited if they get the rare colors or combinations.
Oh, now I want one. I didn't know it was gamified that way. That's fun.
Oh, yeah. Kate wants a turn at the slot machine. The thing is, as I was reading up on Labubus, because it may surprise you to know, but I was not up on the Labubu phenomenon before we decided to talk about it. Really before they dropped in the Art Basel shop, which I guess is maybe one reason why they're doing it, because it puts these designer toy collectibles on the radar of a different kind of community. However, as I read about it, you would have to work pretty hard to convince me that there's something interesting about the phenomena of Labubu themselves. Some of the coverage is marveling at the speculative mania around them, and the company behind them is now very, very valuable, more valuable than most toy companies, than Hello Kitty and all that. But it's just Beanie Babies. There's like a toy craze every few years. It's just Beanie Babies. I collected, comic book trading cards when I was a kid. You would do exactly this, where you would have packs of trading cards, which would have random ones in them so that you wouldn't get the gold foil cards every time. It's Pokemon, it's NFTs. It's the same structure as NFTs. NFTs may be a little more interesting, despite the speculative hype around them, just in the sense that it was a different way of trading stuff via the blockchain and so on. So The phenomena itself I find unremarkable and don't find it particularly interesting one way or another that it's at Art Basel. I'd even say it is slightly more art adjacent than any of those other things I just mentioned, in the fact that there is an actual artist behind this. Like you mentioned, he started at least with a series of children's books, drawing from Nordic mythology. The character itself, to me, looks pretty derivative, but what do I know?
Well, I think it tells you a little bit about demand. And okay, so there are a couple of things going on. I think that as a younger generation, you're talking about middle schoolers here, and actually it turns out middle schoolers have this immense buying power. Who knew? It's like the fidget spinners or the Stanley Cups that I think Kate wrote about last year that are like $100 a pop. These middle schoolers are buying so many of them. So there's just this volume trading that's possible there, which I think is interesting.
But do you think, Naomi, that there's something to this? Because in recent years, auction houses have been doing these cross-category sales, trying to bring in a more diverse audience and hopefully get them to also buy fine art. Is there something to that, like logic with these in that sense? Like they're at Basel. I don't think middle schoolers were lining up for them there, right?
No, I don't think middle schoolers were, but I think that at Basel, it was just Basel riding on the kind of viral hype. And it's kind of a very obviously engineered press moment that they had Labubus and they sold out. I think that acceleration of these trends is something also, this happening very, very quickly, that this Labubu craze kicks off. And it's like the NFTs, people reselling them for, exponentially larger amounts of money until eventually kind of the hype peaks and the speculative kind of bubbles emerges next to something else. But your question was about the art, whether there's something that the auction houses can learn from this. Was that the question?
I was just remarking that you see these more and more, these cross-category sales where they're bringing in different kinds of collectibles into these spaces. Just noticing that happens on a lot of fronts right now. And to Ben's point, in the sense that there's nothing really new here.
Yeah, they're selling sneakers now at auctions, which has a lot of the same characteristics. People follow drops. They have special limited edition special sneakers, and people have very strong opinions about which variants and which generation of shoes they want to collect. And there's a kind of connoisseurship there that connects to art connoisseurship. Do you buy the argument? I read one thing about this that called it regression core, that it is not middle schoolers collecting them. There's a fashion thing, but there is a certain thing about people wanting to regress to a childlike space, and that it connects to just a sense of lowered expectations, and the speculative part connects to some of the same things the NFT craze connected to, a certain sense of economic precarity where you're willing to just turn off the critical part of your mind that says that this is stupid and say, maybe I'll get the winning lottery ticket.
There is something egalitarian about it in that sense, where anyone can be a winner and maybe not regress.
I don't know if that's what I was saying.
Just the premise that, well, I guess you could pay more and your probability would go up, but more like recession indicator than regression, in the sense that it's a relatively affordable if you buy one, and Willy Wonka concept there.
Yeah, you can access it. I mean, this reminds me of a conversation I had with some Damien Hirst NFT collectors back in sort of peak NFT. And they said, well, the way they see it, it's just, the NFT is the price of a ticket to the Damien Hirst Club.
I should say, one of you, I don't know who, dropped a TikTok video into our channel.
It was definitely not me then.
It's a 24 karat gold Labubu made. It is not cheap. For 20,000 pounds, I believe it costs. And there's also a rose gold one. So there's been derivative versions of this that are going for, I don't know if anyone's bought it.
Is that a Lafufu?
Could be, yeah. Lawsuit impending.
I will say, I do want to point people to Kathy Fan's article, our director of ArtNet's content in China and co-author of the Asia Pivot newsletter, has an entire explainer on the Labubu craze, because there have been auctions in China now where these things have sold for $150,000 or something like that, the equivalent. And she talked to a specialist. I don't know if I believe this, but saying that not Labubus, but Kaising Lung, the artist, might be the archetype of a new kind of artist figure, because his original art comes into focus through the diffusion line, so to speak, and becomes more valuable in relation to the app. And that might be a way that the art market works more to the tastes of an emerging generation.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, she talks about it being a sort of reverse trajectory to artists like Takashi Murakami, who gained the kind of institutional acclaim first and then, released their merch lines. And it kind of presents an alternate path to art stardom that is less gatekept, I suppose, that relies on popular perception rather than critical evaluation.
Does anyone know if Ka-Sing Lung has an art gallery representation?
I think he's represented by Takashi Murakami's gallery, Kai Kai Kiki.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. Well, it's been colorful. There's never a dull moment in the art world bubble. Thanks for joining us, Naomi. It was great to have you on.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Ben.
Yeah, too much to say, but we'll just talk more next time.
For sure. That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili with contributions from myself, Ben Davis, Carolyn Goldstein, and Naomi Rea. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.